Get rolling. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Today, we have a special two guests from Q Casino. We have Lance Carnahan. He's the Vice President of Operations. Lance, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And we have Marty Maiers, Director of Marketing. Marty, thank you for being here.
Yeah, you're welcome anytime.
Yeah, so we're going to dive in and learn a little bit about Q Casino's experience with gaming analytics and your experience with gaming analytics individually. Before we get started, let's start with you, Lance. Can you tell us a little bit about your job and your responsibilities?
Yeah, as Vice President of Operations here at Q Casino, it's kind of over-encompassing, kind of oversee all operations when it comes to gaming, entertainment. We do run an ice arena around here, so I focus over that too. We also have a sports book on property and just general housekeeping and maintenance around the property too. So, kind of got my hand in a lot of pots around here.
And how about yourself, Marty?
Yeah, so really it's two core pieces for me, traditional marketing, whether it's direct marketing, direct mail, or advertising, as well as all player development functions.
Mm-hmm. And how big are each of your teams?
Well, I'd say, yeah, that's a good question. I'd say probably about 150 when it's all said and done, looking at all different departments that report to me.
Mm-hmm. And Marty?
I have 7, not as big as Lance, so we're small but mighty.
Yeah, but when you say 150, Lance, how big is the entire team at Q Casino? How many
we
staff?
got about, shortly, a small, just a bit over 400 staff on Q Casino Resorts.
And for those who are not familiar with Q Casino, you're in Iowa. Can one of you walk us through, give us a kind of a quick overview of the property and what you offer?
Yeah. We're an all-encompassing resort. Right now, we're in the middle of a renovation period. Currently, we have over 500 slot machines, 16 table games. We have an indoor entertainment venue. In the summers, we do what we call a Backwater Series, which is an outdoor concert series, and we're in the midst of building an amphitheater that will hold around 8,000 people, which should be completed in November and ready to go for next season. Also part of our renovation is we're building a 7-story hotel to be adjoined to our current Hilton Hotel. That's going to roughly have 98 rooms in the 7-story. On the 7th story, have a rooftop restaurant too. So like I said, we have slots, tables, sports book, food and beverage. We have an all ages area where we have about 85 arcade games, duck pin bowling, axe tossing. And we have quite a few, 3 event spaces and 2 small party rooms. So we try to be over encompassing and be able to hit everybody in the Dubuque tri-state area.
Well, and speaking of which, the demographics, what does population look like and who is the demographic that's coming to your property?
Yeah, the Dubuque area, the town proper is about 55,000 people. We're right at the junction of Iowa, Wisconsin, and Illinois, so we're probably about 100,000 within, 45 miles. Our demographic, number one, like where are they coming from, is Dubuque, but our major feeder markets are, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Madison, Wisconsin, Rockford, Illinois. As far as like other demographics, it's probably just like every traditional casino. We skew 55 plus. We're a locals market and mainly female, probably about 55-45 female to male.
We'll get back to that in a moment. But when you talk about over 50,000 population, over 400 staff, you also are a significant employer in the area.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And Lance, you mentioned that, we're seeing the stories out of Las Vegas that in general tourism is down, but you're saying, in fact, your most recent month was a great month.
Yeah, well, it was great. It was a good month. Dubuque market hasn't seen the decreases as you've seen, let's say, in the Vegas markets and stuff like that. A little bit has to do. We are going against construction last year too, which kind of obviously changes that too. But kind of a little more background too. In the Dubuque market, there is us and the Diamond Joe. So of this 55,000 plus, there are two casinos in the area. So it's good to see when the Dubuque market itself doesn't decrease. It kind of goes to show that both properties are doing well, and the economy itself is obviously struggling a little bit, but it is not as let's say relevant as it is in, let's say, bigger jurisdictions like Las Vegas.
You referenced that you have the majority of your customers are female. Is that reflective of the population too, or why is that, do you think?
No, that's generally more a general casino trend that, especially with slot players, it does skew a little more female, and they do what I found in my experience is they make the gaming decision, and that's why we maybe sometimes we will market towards that demographic specifically.
Okay, so in regard to gaming analytics, can one or both of you, let's have both of you do it. If we can start with you, Marty, how are you using gaming analytics in your day-to-day?
Yeah, so very specific to the departments that I run. So number one, like our host team and our player development manager uses a lot of the player development functions, tracking their players, seeing who players that haven't been here in a while, kind of that churn rate. They also keep a lot of notes in there, tag stuff, whether you like the steakhouse, and put stuff in there. We also use it. We have a separate host tracking system, so we use a lot of the data for their bonus program so that they can see how their players are performing on a weekly basis. On the marketing end, we use a lot of the call it the canned reports that are already set up to take a look at some trends based upon ADT demographics. We've also created a lot of our own reports to track things like new members, comp abusers, free slot play use. Recently just created reports to know who's upgrading tiers. So, and then probably one of the bigger benefits is we use it for all our direct mail data polls now. So all of our direct mail, we used to go through a third party, and we handle everything internally now.
Awesome. And Lance, how about for you?
Yeah, not quite as robust as Marty, but a lot of it for us is just real-time analytics based on games. It's really useful when it takes to look at our floor. We can kind of see in real time how our leagues are performing, how our regular games are going, and when we want to make adjustments to the gaming floor, it's really easy to pull up data, see which our bottom performer games are, our top performing games. Really take a look at that lease, because lease is such pivotal and something you can change pretty frequently. So it's really nice to be able to take a look at that, see that is, and you can make some real-time decisions based off of vendor type. You can base it off of game type and stuff like that too. It's really good to be able to dive into the nuts and bolts of like what's really driving and what people are playing. So it's very good for us. We also like to use too is our heat map too. So our heat map is something we can look at to look at our floor usage, make sure we can distribute our machines and make sure we're utilizing the entire floor too. So that's something we look at when we do our machine moves.
For some who might be listening or watching this interview, you said you're using gaming analytics or AI technology to adjust the floor. Can you unpack that a little bit for somebody be familiar with what you're saying?
Sorry, you kind of cut out there. Say that again.
Okay. Yeah, sure. For somebody who might not be using gaming analytics or AI technology to adjust the floor, can you unpack that a bit, what that means?
Yeah, so I mean, that's just like essentially, I think a lot of the people who would be watching this have data pulls and stuff like that too. So it's just really looking at the KPIs of our games, our coin in versus house average, our win per machine, our Theo, how they're doing in percentages and stuff like that too. So everything we can get can be pulled in real time and be able to adjust it and then dive into like games. You can divide it down by bank type. You can divide it down by denominations and stuff like that too. So you can see what that core factor is. It's really adjusting or affecting the changes in the games and stuff like that.
And just for a history, how long have you been at Q Casino?
I've been here for about 8 years.
And how long is the property been using gaming analytics?
I'd say about a year.
Yeah.
How are you making those decisions to adjust the floor before using gaming analytics?
So we had a third-party analytics provider. So they generally gave us canned reports at the end of each month. So it was usually in a monthly or quarterly view back. So generally speaking, at the end of each month, we'd get a report back, let's say about either 7 to 15 days later, and then we could look at the machine information. And then, so the benefit of this versus the old way is we're looking at data within 24 hours, 48 hours. The old way, it usually took us 30 to 45 days to be able to kind of get the report. And then if it took to customize it, maybe a game wasn't on the floor for the full month. So then you'd have to go back to the third party, ask them to customize, hey, can you get us same timetables and so on and so forth too. So it was a lot of back and forth information. Now it's kind of at the fingertips where we can custom report that ourselves.
Are you familiar? Can you speak on what the process was for the third party, how they were filtering through the data?
Oh, that was just raw data that came out of there. There was a little bit of a filtering process, but it was generally speaking just raw data that we put into Excel documents that broke it down by coin in, win, and so on and so forth. So it was just essentially we use our backend is Oasis. So we would just pull, and they would just pull that core data out of there, coin in, will, spin, so on and so forth. So,
and then the analytic part of that was done manually.
Yeah, we did that. We did that in house. There was a lot of Excel documents that we plugged into that could kind of give us, so our times house average and our lease percentage and our so on and so forth. So that was all information we did in house.
Well, other than what you mentioned, which is a 30 to maybe a 60-day lag time on the information you're seeking, compared to now, what you said is about 1 to 2 days. What were some of the other drawbacks of doing things the old way?
I think, well, like I said, I'll let Marty can talk on this a little too, but the customizable. So it's always a back and forth. So one benefit now is you kind of start working a report and seeing what you want to see, and you can adjust it, and kind of that report can evolve into something else. In the past, if you wanted to see information on this and you kind of had a question, then you had to go back there. They would pull a little different database. Then, the back and forth, whether it's last an email, 2 or 3 days, then they got to pull a report and get back to you and back and forth. So that was some of the issues that we saw there.
And maybe some errors.
Yeah, absolutely. Human error, right? When you start entering into a spreadsheet, there is always that chance for human error.
Yeah. And then can we talk about heat maps? If you could unpack that a bit for someone who might not be familiar with what you're saying.
Yeah, so the heat map is something we worked with you guys to do. So generally what we did was we pulled our map from AutoCAD. That's our kind of our floor design machine. And then we plugged our assets into that. So then once through the assets, there was a color coding, generally red, obviously, with more activity, and blue and green was your lower activity. And then there's a filter on that. So you could look at spins, you could look at coin in, you could look at Theo, you could look at real game for machines and stuff like that. So there's a bunch of volume indicators that you can look at to be able to kind of base like, hey, where's our play gravitating to? Where's our revenue? Obviously, that kind of sits there around your lease. Then you can kind of look at your poker machines, your high denoms, your low denoms. Are they really affecting it? And, are you getting the best use of your gaming floor disbursement?
Great, Marty. If we could start with you, but let's hear about direct mail. You mentioned that's one of the more interesting features for you.
Yeah, I started at the Q about a year ago at the same time that gaming analytics. So coming from prior 17 years of different kinds of experience. I was surprised that we were using a third party and we were kind of relying upon, just like what Lance said with slots, kind of at their mercy for when they could pull data and stuff. So we would make the request, and it could take anywhere from 6 hours to 2 days, depending on their schedule, to say like, okay, hey, here's the data. And now with the different campaigns that you can create in the segments, once you set it up the first time, and honestly, we had my direct mail core has 80 some segments, so it took an hour or two to set up. But every month after that, I just push a button, and it produces the data, up to date data. So it's been a huge time saver, and it allows us to do things on our schedule, right? We don't have to rely on somebody else's time and schedule. So that's been a huge benefit, but it also allows us to play around. Before we would be like, hey, can you send us this criteria? We want to see what it looks like. And maybe the next day you get it, and then you're like, well, no, let's try it this way. I can do that all within minutes now. Like, I'll just play with something, whether it's a ADT level or something else. And so it allows us to see instant results, and then ultimately put it into a segment, export it, and then we have mailhouse ready files.
You said it like this. You said play with it on your schedule versus having to rely on the third party. Do you think you're as a marketer, are you getting some new ideas, creative ideas? Because like you said, you're able to play around with it.
Yeah, I think, we were pretty static with how we were running direct mail before, but this allows us to be a lot more dynamic, so that if we need to test something or add some layers in to segments, it allows us to do that. But being able to do it yourself, it just gets your mind thinking a little differently. And absolutely, you come up with different ideas like, well, what if I run it this way versus I run it that way? One of the features that we haven't used yet, but I plan on, is kind of that A/B testing on some of our larger segments. So again, it's just something like, it would take time to accomplish some of these things that we can do in minutes.
Are you able to customize messaging to your player?
Yeah.
Based on the interest.
Yeah. So we can, something we're going to do in the next month is, we're going to have 2 different core monthly mailers, one for our table games and one for our slots, that kind of tailor the message. And so, GA, I can easily, and I already do it, I pull table data players versus, slot players. So we certainly do it that way, but also through some of the, the data that we can pull, we know who's like, hey, what tier you are, that we can customize messaging to, like, maybe our top 2 tiers versus, our lower tiers, as well as like even our VIP players. And we do that with offers to say like, hey, this level player gets this type of hotel offer, like free rooms versus maybe a discounted rate.
Do you think that your players feel more listened to, whether they know what system you're using in the background or not?
I'd say yes, because once it's a lot easier for our hosts now to go into GA and see who their hosted players are, and then like who's been contacted, who hasn't. They keep notes like that. Prior to GA, it was I don't want to call it the Wild West, but there wasn't a system to say like, hey, what's an easy way to see who your players are, how they're performing, have they not been here? So they're certainly using that functionality to make sure they're staying on top of players, to make sure that, they're hitting their revenue goals.
Have you seen any quantitative benefits with gaming analytics for either of you, whether that's labor, time saved, or actually in the bottom line in profit?
Well, I can say, because my team, we did a lot of the in-house massaging the data to go into like spreadsheets. So that saves at least I don't know, 10, 15 hours a month when it came to putting all that information in, and that depended on our adjustments too. So, and then the other thing it's one too is what we're doing too is hold percentage margins. So we're looking right now on what games when we're trying to tweak the floor, what games are the most easiest ones to make adjustments to be more profitable and stuff like that too. So there is absolutely some bottom line revenue implications there where we can make real-time decisions based off of what we're seeing versus waiting the 30 to 45 days, seeing where the holding is, so on and so forth, and looking at the deviations there. So
Lance, on that note, what is the response from vendors? I mean, you've been at the Property Q for 8 years, right?
mm-hmm.
What is the response from vendors been when you're giving them this feedback?
Yeah. So no, actually, and then one I was going to kind of touch on this. There's an application that the vendors absolutely love. It's called the Vendor View. That's where we can give their information back to the vendors about how their games are performing on the floor versus house average. In the past, it's one of those you can give information, but there's no perspective on how that is in comparison, right? You can tell them a win per unit, so on and so forth, and unless you're kind of dividing it out there. So it's really a good way for them to be able to check versus zone, versus total floor and stuff like that too. So my vendors love it because it's just a click of the mouse. They come on the property, say, hey, we're going to be here next Thursday. Can you give me how my games are performing? I usually have that printed out for them. Give it to them. We go through the list of like, hey, this is about performing. Well, here's some theme changes maybe in this cabinet type that we can make to adjust the floor, and so on and so forth. So that's very useful, and they appreciate it greatly.
So not only like feedback or a performance report, but it's also become a communications tool with your vendors.
That's correct. Yep.
And it probably even in a way harnesses a better relationship.
Absolutely.
If you're just able to meet and have just a kind of a streamlined conversation, there's not a lot of guessing going on or assumptions.
Yeah, it builds an agenda. I mean, it gives us something to kind of let's work through this list to see where we're at and what changes we can do together. So absolutely.
And you said saving 10 to 15 hours. Is that for one staff member or multiple?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, that was one staff member for my team. Obviously, as a bigger property, that would probably be more. But that was one position that I had dedicated to running that data information through for us.
And what is the position that is saving, say, 10 or 15 hours?
For me, she was the operations manager. So she was the one that was putting that information in for me.
And she's still on board?
At this current moment, we are looking for that position. But yeah, she is no longer on board.
If she was, and the new person who comes on board, what do they fill that 10 or 15 hours with? Instead of
that, they can just be focusing more on what's the value given on the games too. So obviously, when we make purchases and we need to be doing that, what is our delinquencies and where should we be adding to the floor and so on and so forth. So rather than doing analytical clerical work, it's more like what are the games out there, what are the options and stuff like that. So being more proactive.
Great. Let's see, Marty, anything you would like to add related to this?
To kind of go back to the quantitative part of of how GA is doing for us, on the marketing PDN, we created custom reports to identify what we call free slot play abusers, people that just use it and walk away. And so we have a daily report, and it actually it allowed us to make a change to a system setting to not allow it because a lot of people are using it, and that's, I think, annualized savings was up to $130,000 of just like free play there. But also it allows us to identify comp abusers. On the direct mail, I call it a profitability filter, but we now kick out people that are not profitable on a Theo basis, right? If their expenses are higher than their Theo win, they're not going to get mail-in offers from us. They got to kind of earn their way back through profitability. So we have seen, I can't quantitate that real easily, but I mean, it's dollars that we can not necessarily save and take to the bank, but reinvest in other ways.
You said $150,000.
About 130,000 in annualized of like free play that people would just come download and leave.
And can you walk us through that a little bit, that process, how they would do that?
Yeah, so essentially, we didn't have a safeguard on our system, so people could come in and like, hey, if they had a $20 offer, just use the $20, and then pull the card after that 20's up, and then take the winnings off of that. And so it was, with our system, it wasn't recording rated play, so it wasn't, judging them on a 1 day, very low ADT. So we had people. And it's a fairly common practice around the country. There's slot rings that do this, but they do like a big 1 day ADT to get a high coupon for a few weeks, few months, and then they just use that free play to take the winnings. But now we have a settings. We saw the impact of that through GA, and so now we have a setting which does not allow guests to do that anymore.
And that's where the 130,000 in savings.
Yeah.
Have there been other quantitative results that you've been able to measure?
Just like, with that comp abuser, the same thing, people that were just coming in and maybe using comps that weren't. So we back that off so that people, and a lot of times what happens is like friends give their card to friends who come and get free drinks from a kiosk. So now we change PIN numbers if we see a pattern of that, and they can't do that. So maybe not the biggest savings, but it's a control that we have in place.
And as you talk about that, we talk about kind of indirect benefits of gaming analytics. And what you're describing is the person who's going to abuse the system. You really don't want them in your casino. And if maybe, yes, maybe you can verify whether this is true, but when you filter those types that are abusing out of the property, it should create a better atmosphere for those who are there for the right reasons.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily, call them like bad actors. They're just people taking advantage of something, and so we just take that advantage away, just like we, do at table games and stuff like that. If we think you're beating the house, we're gonna find a way that you do not, or back you off. I mean, we haven't been in the position where we've had to say like, okay, your money's no good here, but through this, people have learned, and it's more like, oh shoot, they caught me. I better just be a regular player now.
Good numbers. Any other numbers that either one of you can think of that you've seen benefits quantitatively, whether it was hours?
I think when I talked about that profitability filter on the direct mail, once we put that in, I mean, we mail to close to 10,000 people for our monthly mailer. And then, another 4 or 5 for inactive. So, on a monthly basis, it's up to 15,000. And by adding that, we probably had about 500 people or so that didn't receive mail because, their expenses were higher than their theoretical. So it didn't make sense to keep giving them more.
Oh, whereas before everyone would get the mail.
Yeah. We didn't use that as a criteria in our direct mail.
Very good. What is the perception of using gaming analytics been as an organization? Feedback from the C-suite, the CEO. What's been the overall feeling?
I think it's the best way to say it. The visualizations part of it is the best way. Obviously, as CEO, he's very detailed with all different aspects, of growth and stuff like that. So to have something that is very easily to visualize and get that information on the fingertips has been most useful for them too. So then, if need be, he can reach to us and we can, dive into the weeds on more information, give them more details too. So I think that's the biggest asset for it.
Yeah, I think as a result of GA, we've actually, and having that information at our fingertips, we have a weekly meeting with key players, marketing, operations, CEO, COO, that we review data, and we're able to make adjustments or decisions quicker. Whereas in the past that might have been more on a monthly basis, but now we're reviewing things much more quickly.
What about the feedback from your host team?
The host team, they love it. It's kind of a one-stop shop, whereas maybe they had to keep Post-it notes or something else about like, hey, this player likes this, or hey, they like the steakhouse, or they like a king room and something. So we're able to keep some of that detail in there, but it's easier for them, especially on the player view, to go in and see like more trends. Also, a benefit is they can go in and see what type of games they're playing, like their top 3 games. So, I tell them all the time, it's take a look at those, and if they're saying they're not winning, suggest a new game, or maybe it's a new game that's similar with the same type of called math, whatever on the game. So it allows them to dig into their player a little deeper than before.
Yeah, on that note too, it's also very useful on the player side too when we're making adjustments to the floor, because sometimes a low performing game still might be played by a high performing player, right? They just the volumes don't hit there. So when we are making adjustments and maybe taking a machine off the floor, we're able to look up like who are our top 50 players that are playing these games, and maybe give them a reach out. A marketing team or host will reach out to them and say, hey, just to let you know, this game will be going off the floor. I'd like you to try game A, B, or C that are very similar to it, and it really kind of takes that shock factor out, because you know how it is. Every time you move something off the floor without telling them, it always upsets somebody.
Yeah. Wow, it makes them feel really that they're being listened to, and they're part of the decision. There's no surprises. Mm-hmm. They become I bet they become extra loyal to the property, right? When you involve them like that.
Yeah, I mean, if they feel like they're part of the process, or at least if they have a chance to put some input in, rather than show up one day and like, hey, where's my Dean Martin, so to speak, then it's that little extra touch. We call personalization here, but like those little extra things we can do for our top players that are above and beyond does make a difference.
Marty, you mentioned something about steak.
Yeah, no, I think that's just something as we, build a database of player interests through, the little hashtag memos. And I encourage them to create like a standard form so that like in the future, if we have enough data on these players and we're going to be opening a steakhouse, but like, can I, and I know I can, but can I pull a direct mail list of people that have that hashtag steakhouse, right? And then we can focus on those to be like, hey, look at this great new product. So just those little things that maybe we can do. We always have great concerts outside, and we're going to have even better ones next year. But like, let's find our rock lovers versus our country lovers, and if we have a country show, let's send them a ticket offer first.
What's been the most popular concert this year?
Let's say Warren Zires. We had him a couple weeks ago. He performed very well.
What's the big one coming up?
We got Bush coming up. If you remember Bush from the 2000s. Yeah.
Oh, very cool. What else? Right now we hear about AI everywhere we look. How do you reference gaming analytics within your organization? Do you call it AI or do you call it gaming analytics, or both?
I call it GA.
GA. Use an acronym, right? Yeah. Your initials.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk to a friend, if you're out at a barbecue or whatever, and there's conversation going on about AI at work, do you ever talk about, we're using it?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. How does that conversation go?
It's just kind of more around the just kind of talking about how it is like the real-time talking query base, where you're kind of putting a real-time question in there, or a real worded question with giving analytics back on it and stuff like that too. So yeah, just kind of talking about how it is a little bit different than necessarily looking at individual KPIs. You kind of like, you can field a question and it will kind of give you a results based off that, which is very interesting.
Yeah, it comes up in not a lot of conversations, but when people are like, what does marketing look like at a casino? And it's different because the amount of data that we can collect on an individual person's spend is much more than most industries. Like you don't go to a department store and find out, oh, hey, they shopped off this rack and this rack. But like with the casino and game analytics, you can say, oh, they played this machine, they played it here. And you'd almost follow them around with a heat map or something like that. So, I explained like, the software we use allows us to really cater a specific offer based upon many different attributes, whether recency, frequency. I don't think a lot of other places do that. It's a lot of just mass mailings. Hey, here's your coupon, but we can customize offers specific to a person based upon their spend.
To go full circle, gaming analytics, there's talking about some things that you absolutely love so far. What are some things that are maybe either on your wish list that gaming analytics could do, or that you might use it for, or maybe something that you feel like is a little bit not so strong?
For me, I think because I also handle a lot of the analysis here, especially with like the marketing. But I think like event-based analysis could be stronger. I know there is, and I can't think of it without looking at the menu, a module where you can upload a list of players, but it doesn't really give me the information that I want. So a lot of times I just download raw data and kind of in Excel come up with my own results. And it hasn't been a hindrance or anything. It's something I've always done, but if that could be stronger, I wish there could be some better like post formas on events based upon a list of players we upload.
A couple things. Actually, I was going to talk to Steve about one of them. One of them I like. So I know that some recently you guys are working on, let's say, forecasting tool. A budgeting tool would be great. So if we could, in November, we obviously, with us being a unique non-for-profit casino here, we always have to budget a year out and kind of get some, build out our budget based off of financials, mainly slots. So using trends, because that's generally what the budget process is looking at, November's coin-ins on Saturdays and kind of trying to guesswork that. So it really is based off of trends. So if there was kind of more of a, let's say, robust, like I could wait and now I could kind of analyze how I think 2026 is going to look like, so we can kind of throw it in there, and then I can, throw in our special events to try to, massage it the way we want to, because like I said, it's calendar adjustments, it's so on and so forth. And then one thing I do, and I know there's similar ways to do it, and I kind of do it, is a direct comparison tool. A lot of things I do is, we took a game off, I took a game, put a game on. There is a tool that can do that, but what happens if I want to look at bank A versus bank B versus this period of time and stuff like that too. So, something that's more, you can just plug in an asset, you can put in your KPIs of, do I want to do handle pulls? Do I want to do coin in? Do I want to do theoretical? So on and so forth. This is the date range. This is the time range, and so on and so forth, where I can, adjust it. So it's all things that we can do. It's just one of those, if there was a, let's say, one-stop hub that we can put in there, that'd be very useful.
Got it. Thank you. You're at G2E. It's coming up soon. You're talking to a peer. Okay. The peer is at another property, not using gaming analytics or any AI. What do you tell them? Lance, let's start with you.
I've been very pleased with it. Like, it is apples and oranges compared to anything I was used to or dealt with. So just one of those days. It was very easy to learn. Really like the fact that there's monthly. It was weekly at one, but communication, collaboration with the team. So, there's a little bit of a learning curve to kind of understand how you want to structure your questions and so on and so forth to get that perfect. But there was always somebody at an email. And then whenever I'd send an email to Steve or whoever it was, I'd get an email back within a day, at most saying, hey, we've done it on our side. Why don't you try doing it this way? Or if I can show them a report, I'm like, hey, I just can't quite get it right. Then there's always getting a response. You got the in-app or in-computer, like, let's say, question or query or whatever, you could ask them any question. And just overall, just everything I did, I'm very, very pleased with it. It's just, like I said, the information at your fingertip is wonderful, and just the support that you guys provide was great too.
Yeah, Lance, on that note, on support side, how does it differ, say, than other vendors that you're working with?
Well, it's just, like I said, apples and oranges. The other vendor, I mean, obviously I can call them up on the phone and maybe ask some questions, but it just, when it comes to that, it's way more robust. It's way more quick. There's generally no lag. It's something back and like, hey, got this. We'll get you an answer. If I don't have the answer now, I'll get it to you by the next day. So as it compares, it just significantly better.
And I'll piggyback on that. Like I've dealt with a lot of major companies, analytics companies, source systems and stuff, and by far, like Steve and the rest of the support staff, like, has been the most responsive support I've had for a product. I mean, it's quick, and and solutions are real. Sometimes you go to a company and they come back, it's going to cost you this, or it's not possible. But like, I don't think we've had that yet with GA. It's been very well.
Marty, you're a marketer. How would you describe gaming analytics if you were talking to an associate or somebody at work? I just kind of for feedback, how would you describe the company?
I mean, I would describe it as like the company and the product is like a one-stop shop. I mean, if somebody said like what's a good phrase for GA, it'd be like it's work smarter, not harder, right? It makes so many of the functions that we do on a daily, monthly, weekly basis, whatever, so much easier. And I've worked with a lot of these products, and one of the most impressive things that I've seen of any product, probably maybe the most, is that query function. Like, it's almost like you can just sit there and brainstorm and type and get results, play with it and stuff. I've never quite seen that with like from a product where it's almost it's like a Google or Chat GPT, just ask and you get the results that you want, rather than, oh, I got to build a report or I got to build this through a system.
Lance, how would you describe gaming analytics if you were talking to a peer or a co-worker?
Yeah, like Marty said, it just all in all, it's just great. It's such a good tool to utilize. One thing too, I kind of wanted to add is most casinos, and I think probably most operations around there, is marketing and operations are kind of their own silos, right? The marketing does their thing, but they handle the player side, and we handle the machine level side too. Is the collaboration between the two of us now, because of these joint reports and stuff like that, is significantly better. I've never felt like I've been more engaged with marketing, and I would like to think that Marty would say the same thing about the operations side, because it's all information that's available to us, and we can obviously take unique perspectives and discuss like our role in it and stuff like that too. So they answer that question. It's just overall just a great informational tool and collaboration tool.
Awesome. Before we say farewell, I ask this question usually every time, and that is, and in fact, Marty, you probably just answered it. Work smarter, not harder. But maybe there's another one where you're driving down the freeway, there's a big billboard up on gaming analytics. What should it say on the billboard if it's a gaming analytics billboard?
That's a good one. I have a 7-word rule for billboards, so I gotta make it short and simple. Like, work easier, something like that, kind of along the lines of make your life easier, make your work life easier, something like that.
Great. What about you, Lance?
All information on your fingertips. Just everything's right there you're looking for.
Man, awesome. Well, listen, before we say farewell, number one, thank you for making time today. Any parting thoughts? Any last ideas before we say farewell?
I think we covered it.
Yeah, I just to reiterate, great product. We're really happy to have it. It's something, I came from a bigger corporation that had the money to spend, and they had all these systems. So to come here and have a company like GA focus equally on a smaller property, one only, and give us that time has been it's been wonderful.
Awesome. Lance, thank you. Marty, thank you.
Mhm.